Now a museum piece. The Confederate flag to move from the South Carolina Capitol to a nearby museum. Familiar theme. Pope Francis denounces our throwaway culture as he celebrates a public mass in Bolivia. Preserved and protected. Scholars and students study ancient artifacts from Iraq at Catholic University of America. And prepping for the Pope. Children make a video welcoming the Holy Father ahead of his September visit to the U.S. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, July 9th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The Confederate flag will no longer fly at South Carolina's state capitol. Just hours after the State House passed a bill to move it to a museum, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley signs it into law today. The move is a powerful response to the killings of 9 people at a Charleston church last month.
Pray with me if you would.
House lawmakers began the day with a moment of silence, honoring the victims of the mass shooting. What followed was debate on a more permanent move in their memory.
All right, members, we are now on Senate Bill 897.
That's the bill to move the Confederate flag from the South Carolina State House grounds to a nearby museum.
I guess we're all thinking today it'd be nice if we'd find a way for everyone to get behind a resolution here that we can all live with and say that we respected each other. And we've got work to do to get there, I think.
The measure overwhelmingly passed the state Senate earlier this week. Some House lawmakers had proposed amendments that could slow or derail the process, including replacing the flag with another Confederate symbol or sending the issue to a referendum.
I grew up holding that flag in reverence because of the stories of my ancestors carrying that flag into battle.
In the end, after hours of debate, the House passed the Senate's version of the bill. The flag will come down. And that will happen at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in a ceremony at the State House. Also, the mayor of New Orleans wants City Council there to move statues of Confederate General Robert E. Lee and the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, from public displays. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says the government will make federal marriage benefits available to same-sex couples. This follows last month's Supreme Court decision legally redefining marriage. All federal benefits will now be available equally to married couples, including those of the same sex. That's all across the country now. Lynch says programs for veterans and the elderly and disabled will now cover those civil unions. Well, some House Democrats push for a bill requiring federal health programs to use taxpayer dollars to fund abortion. As Wyatt Goolsby reports from Capitol Hill tonight, pro-life leaders are concerned. Wyatt?
Yeah, Brian, about 70 lawmakers are backing this proposed bill. They say the goal is to help low-income women, young women, and minorities. But others say this bill will do the opposite and actually hurt those groups and their families. Should your taxpayer dollars go towards covering all abortions for federal programs? That's the focus of a new bill called the Equal Access to Abortion Coverage and Health Insurance, or Each Woman Act. Spearheaded by California Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the bill takes aim at a rule called the Hyde Amendment. For decades, it has limited taxpayer-funded abortions. The new bill would force Medicaid, Medicare, VA, or other federal insurance to cover all abortion services. Lee is backed by a group called All Above All. It says the Hyde Amendment puts poor women at a disadvantage because they can't get complete abortion coverage through Medicaid. National Right to Life President Carol Tobias says there's another way to look at it.
There was one estimate done a couple of years ago that said that the Hyde Amendment, just by itself, has saved more than 1 million unborn children in this country.
Tobias, who is meeting with national pro-life leaders in New Orleans, says if abortion coverage were required in federal programs, it would be a major setback for the pro-life movement.
We have even more women on Medicaid now than we had, 20, 30 years ago. So there probably would be more babies killed using our tax dollars.
Now, it's unlikely this bill will pass. In January, House members passed a bill that actually would support protections for the Hyde Amendment for federal health care programs. It's also noteworthy that all of the House members who support this bill are Democrats, which will make it difficult to pass in a Republican-controlled Congress. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby at the U.S. Capitol. Thank you, Wyatt. And Baltimore's police commissioner is fired today amid the worst crime spike in that city since the 1970s, as well as plummeting police morale. Anthony Batts had been handpicked by Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake to combat crime and implement reforms in the police department. His firing comes less than 3 months after that city erupted in riots following the death of Freddie Gray. This week, the Baltimore Police Union accused Batts of instructing officers not to engage with rioters. Batts says he was honored to serve Baltimore residents. The Eurozone's finance ministers will meet Saturday to assess Greek plans to secure another financial bailout. That meeting in Brussels will also prepare the ground for Sunday's summit of the 19 Eurozone leaders. That summit is shaping up to be a make-or-break moment for Greece. Without a deal, Greece could effectively be left on its own devices by Monday morning. That could mean the collapse of Greek banks and an exit from the euro. Pope Francis reaches the halfway mark of his South American pilgrimage, celebrating his first Mass in Bolivia. He urges Bolivians to reject a throwaway culture and embrace every member of society. Bolivians pack into Christ the Redeemer Square in Santa Cruz for the Pope's Mass. The government declaring a national holiday so workers and students could attend. The Mass is celebrated on a wooden altar made by one of the country's 36 indigenous groups.
Del Padre, y del Hijo, y del Espíritu Santo.
The Holy Father arrived in Bolivia from Ecuador yesterday. President Evo Morales presented him a politically charged gift, a crucifix carved into a wooden hammer and sickle, the symbol of communism. Morales has clashed with the local Catholic Church. His new constitution secularizes this overwhelmingly Catholic nation. He removed the Bible and cross from the presidential palace and replaced Catholic rites with Andean religious rituals at official state ceremonies. A call for unity and dialogue from the Holy Father on this visit.
Por favor, les pido que no se olviden de rezar por mí. Gracias.
And as he does so often, asking the people of Bolivia to pray for him. Carolina Requena reports for our news partner, Prensa. She joins us by satellite from a windy Santa Cruz in Bolivia. What are you hearing on the streets there, Carolina?
Hello, yes, the people are so happy. The people are saying that the Pope here is coming as a pilgrim, another pilgrim, to renew the country's faith. Also, they are saying he's transmitting the love of Jesus, his mercy, and his hope.
So does he show any signs of fatigue? I mean, there's a strenuous schedule. You've got that high elevation. How does the Pope look?
Yeah, he's doing fine. He doesn't look affected by the altitude, neither by this full agenda. Maybe in some of his speeches he looked a little tired, but he's doing great to be with the people.
And what does the schedule for Pope Francis look like for tomorrow?
On Friday, he will go to Palmasola Rehabilitation Center, where he will listen to some of the testimonies of the prisoners. And then he will give them a message, a special message for them. Then he will meet with the bishops in Bolivia at La Santa Cruz Parish. And at the end, he will fly to Asunción, Paraguay, to continue his trip to Latin America.
All right, he will stay busy. We appreciate you. Carolina Requena joining us from Santa Cruz. Thank you. And here in Washington, the faculty chair for Catholic Distance University, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Matthew, President Morales of Bolivia has been known to oppose the Catholic Church. Why would he invite the Pope, and why would the Pope accept that invitation?
Well, it is certainly true. He's no great friend of the Church. One of the first things he did after his election, I think in 2006, was to strip out from the presidential palace all signs of the Catholic Church. It is important for someone like Morales, who's a secularizer, to maintain as best he can his popularity with the people. The fundamental reality is that Bolivia is 80% Catholic. Mm-hmm. So inviting the Pope, from his standpoint, just makes good political sense.
But the Pope is dealing with some pretty heavy hitters here. Between Morales, a few weeks, he's in Cuba with the Castros. Can you make any comparison to between Francis and John Paul II, who dealt with the communist leaders of his era?
Right. Well, Francis, much like John Paul II, readily accepted the invitation to go to Bolivia. John Paul II accepted invitations from dictators in different parts of the world. Why? Because as the vicar of Christ, Francis said it today. He said, "I come to affirm the faith of believers." He is, in a way, in the same way that John Paul II did, speaking beyond someone like Morales, someone like the Castros. This is their prophetic message to the world, but targeted especially to Catholics in these dictatorships, in these places that are less free, to galvanize the faith, but also to remind them of their role, their place in culture.
I'll never forget the communist leader in Poland cringing when John Paul II just stood for the truth. Do you see Francis doing that when he goes to Cuba? Will he stand up for the human rights issues? Will he call them out at all on religious liberty?
I think Francis will do what he does best, and that is to reach to the peripheries. And what I mean by that is that he's going to speak to the Cuban people, but at the same time, he's speaking to the whole of Latin America. As you know, Francis is no liberation theologian. He's no supporter of communism. He has, in his brief pontificate, managed to move Cuba largely out of the orbit of the communist world toward something new. What that is going to look like is open to debate. But something is on the horizon, and Francis is slowly moving Cuba in that direction in exactly the same way that John Paul II very prayerfully moved the Soviet Union toward its own inevitable demise.
And effectively, I might add. Well, the future is very interesting there, and we appreciate your insight, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Thanks.
Privileged to be with you.
Coming up, we have some progress to report in the fight against ISIS in Iraq. And scholars study ancient Christian culture from Iraq, preserved here in the heart of our nation's capital. Dearly beloved youth, are you resolved to resist firmly with the help of divine grace against every attempt made to violate your chastity? Those words of Pope Pius XII at the canonization of St. Maria Goretti, killed defending her holy purity and celebrated on the church calendar this week. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and time is running out for a nuclear deal to be reached with Iran. The Obama administration must submit an agreement to Congress by tomorrow to avoid any extensive legislative review. The U.S. continues to oppose Iran's demand for an end to a United Nations arms embargo. Matthew McInnis, a scholar with the American Enterprise Institute, is joining us. He focuses on Iran and its intentions and will be an expert testifying before a subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs. Do you think the latest deadline that has been extended twice now will be met in the Iran talks?
Well, actually, what we're hearing today is that we may get a deal by tomorrow. There's been a lot of concern recently because of the injunction of the new removal of the arms embargo against Iran has come at the last minute, and I think there's been a concern that that may blow up the talks. But it looks like right now we may get a deal.
So what's the point of these deadlines if they keep getting extended and our team is still at the table even though some have already left?
It's a good question because honestly the deadlines sometimes force decisions that perhaps are best left further down the road. I think the Americans, in particular because of pressure from Congress, want to set deadlines, but sometimes the Iranians use that, frankly, to their advantage to push us towards compromising too soon because we're afraid about what's going to happen with Congress.
How interesting. Speaking of Congress, if no agreement is reached by tomorrow, Congress will have 60 days instead of 30 to review such a deal. Is that significant in all this?
It is to some degree. I think everyone worries about an additional 30 days. Well, what will happen during that period? What will Congress do? At the same time, I think Congress has a very important role here for oversight and to make sure that this deal is actually, acceptable. I have a lot of concerns about this deal, and I think Congress needs to, exercise its authority in trying to review this. But at the same time, I'm not sure Congress in the end can change much of what's going to happen. I think the president's going to get what he wants.
Is this likely to carry on for a long time, or if an agreement is reached, is that the end of the story here?
Actually, in some ways, it's just the beginning of the story because you're going to have a period of defining terms for verification. What does it mean if we do this or do that? I'm expecting actually years of kind of this vague, murky verification process that's going to be very frustrating, I think, to the Americans and the Europeans. And so, again, this is a long road for us.
Highlight your testimony on Capitol Hill today.
Yeah, what I'm focusing on at Capitol Hill is about the relationship between Iran and our Gulf Arab partners, as well as Israel, and looking at the impact of a nuclear deal on those dynamics. In particular, what I'm worried about is shifting balance of power in the region, especially if we lose things like the arms embargo, because that's something that could threaten our own, our Navy, our Air Force there that's stationed there in the Gulf, as well as our Gulf partners. And I'm very nervous that we're going to compromise too much on that in the deal.
Critical issues. Matthew McInnis with the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for being with us tonight, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
And Shiite troops are advancing on areas held by the Islamic State north of Baghdad. A Shiite fighter says small villages and districts north of Baghdad have been retaken from ISIS militants. ISIS seized much of northern and western Iraq last summer and now controls about a third of Iraq and Syria. The Shiite peace brigades have been advancing on suspected Islamic State hideouts. As the Islamic State forces Christians out of that region, it destroys history along the way. But some important Christian artifacts are safely preserved here in America. Jason Calvi has
ISIS took control of parts of Iraq last year. Death and destruction have followed.
Monasteries are being destroyed, manuscripts are being burned, and Christians are being killed. So any preservation that we can do of liturgical traditions, of books, manuscripts, church architecture is essential so that we can remember this heritage as an important heritage of the Christian community. The manuscript here contains the hymns of St. Ephrem.
Dr. Butts keeps that heritage alive. Catholic University has one of the country's largest collections of Syriac manuscripts. Thanks to Father Henri Ivernat. He explored Iraq and the Middle East in the late 19th century, commissioning copies of manuscripts and collecting artifacts.
Even more of Father's manuscripts are down here in the basement of Catholic University's library. It's right here that Father taught Middle Eastern languages many years ago, and where that tradition continues today.
Students study ancient items here.
Going to get manuscripts in Iraq right now is not too possible, and many of the manuscripts can't be found. So these copies, many of them are made for Ivernat. They remain unique witnesses to many of these texts.
And Dr. Butts says that allowed scholars here to preserve ancient Christian culture for generations to come. It's not just the Islamic State that's to blame for the loss of artifacts. Just this week, the Iraqi National Museum announced they had retrieved more than 860 artifacts stolen after the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003. The items were found in Italy, Jordan, and Brian, even the United States.
What a treasure trove. Thank you, Jason. Well, in the middle of his South American visit, Pope Francis lands at the world's highest airport in Bolivia's capital. Susie Pinto reports.
La Paz celebrates the coming of Pope Francis. But at 3,600 meters, nearly 12,000 feet, there was concern for the 78-year-old pontiff. Medical care and oxygen tanks are close by for passengers who suffer with altitude sickness daily. But according to many Bolivians, a much better solution can be found at one of the local markets. Amid piles of tomatoes, cheese, and eggs, and next to the dried chilies are coca leaves. Doña Maria chews the leaves every day, saying it's for hunger and energy and for altitude. There's also the tea or mate made of coca leaf, which is the main ingredient of cocaine. Chewing the leaf and drinking tea are considered safe and legal here. The Vatican tried to minimize the potential effects of altitude by limiting Pope Francis's visit to Bolivia's high plains to just 4 hours. Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, Pope Francis calls children with disabilities treasures. Now they share the treasures of Washington, D.C. with him. And we all take family pictures at a baptism. But a royal portrait? Now that's a different story. We cannot put off change of life for tomorrow or old age, for there may be no tomorrow. A striking Thursday thought from EWTN foundress Mother Angelica. Let's keep Mother in prayer. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Charlie Camosy is a Christian ethics professor at Fordham University in the Bronx, the author of Beyond the Abortion Wars. Charlie, the New York Times article recently written, I've got a quote from this and just get your reaction. This is what they say. This is dealing with the religious liberty and limits. It says, unlike in earlier eras, when religious objections let the faithful separate themselves from institutions they felt they could not support, many conservatives now deploy the phrase as a way of excluding other people. Your response to that?
Well, it's interesting. My experience in New York especially is that people can't think of any other reason we would think this except to be sort of exclusionary or bigots. And I think that means we need to do a better job of why we think what we think about sex, about marriage, about what it means to be human. Why aren't we as interested in, say, divorce or contraception? So when I think about this, I think, let's not just focus on gay marriage, though we should, gay and lesbian marriage. Let's argue this better in the public sphere across a series of issues so we can't be accused of, say, picking out gays and lesbians only for this kind of thing.
We definitely have to do a better job of arguing this case. So I know that your focus is life, pro-life. This religious liberty threat, how does that affect the pro-life movement?
Well, it's a tough one, right? Because if we're going to be able to make our case in the public sphere, we have to be given that space and that freedom. And you know, when people hear what we have to say about pro-life issues, it's sometimes lumped into that same kind of sphere, a sort of misogyny against women. So if we're going to make the case, we have to do it in a way that doesn't single out specific groups like women, like gays and lesbians, as the reason why we're doing this. We have to get back to the fundamentals about life, about the vulnerable, about Matthew 25, about hunger you gave me food, right? Being on the side of the vulnerable and starting there rather than making it seem as if we're about these individual groups.
It seems like nobody wants to hear this, though. This is such a divisive issue. Can we have meaningful dialogue?
I think so. I think the first step is to see our conversation partners as something other than enemies, right? And seeing this as a kind of war, right? Us versus them. Let's start with our own hearts, right? This is Pope Francis's big thing. Let's convert ourselves before we go out into the public sphere this way.
All right, the book is Beyond the Abortion Wars. The author, Charlie Camosy. We appreciate you being with us, Charlie. Thanks.
My pleasure.
D.C., New York, and Philadelphia are all preparing for the visit of Pope Francis in September. Catherine Szeltner introduces us tonight to some kids who just can't quite contain their excitement.
¿A ti te gusta hacer fotos y luego descargarlas en el ordenador?
¿Querés que te diga la verdad? Yo soy un tronco con la máquina.
In February, Pope Francis hosted a Google Hangout for kids with learning disabilities. Now, U.S. kids with special needs are returning the favor.
Without commercial interruption or video.
The Catholic Coalition for Special Education launched a video today to welcome Pope Francis to Washington, D.C. this September.
And this is our nation's capital.
10 kids ranging from first grade through high school give Francis a tour through D.C. landmarks. They were excited to see the final product.
I think it's like a big accomplishment. It's really cool. I love it.
The group's founder is grateful Pope Francis has reached out to people with special needs.
Very often people with disabilities and children with disabilities are marginalized, and hence their families are marginalized. So I think people are hearing a very welcoming message.
These kids agree. They like this Pope.
I mean, he is Catholic, and when he got elected as Pope, he said, "I am not a saint, I am a sinner." He's been one of the best Catholic leaders that I could even hear and see.
Now these students can't wait to see Pope Francis in their hometown and tell him how they feel.
You're awesome and I love you. You're awesome.
The Catholic Coalition for Special Education hopes this video inspires more inclusion for kids with special needs at Catholic schools and maybe will lead to a meeting with Pope Francis himself. Brian?
Spoken so beautifully, those children. Thank you, Catherine. Well, Prince William and his wife, Kate, have just released some new family photos. The family portraits were taken at the estate of Queen Elizabeth following Princess Charlotte's baptism on Sunday. A spokesman for the royal couple says they're very happy to share the photos. The family hopes everyone enjoys them as much as they do. As we leave you tonight, until tomorrow for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we have some fresh photos from the Pope's visit to Bolivia as we say goodnight.